The most powerful real estate dynasty in New York City didn't crumble because of a market crash or a hostile takeover. It nearly collapsed in the private dining room of a Michelin-starred restaurant on the Upper East Side, all because a trembling, underpaid waitress did the one thing she had been explicitly told never to do. She opened her mouth. Wren Gallagher was the kind of person other people looked right through. At 27, she moved through the world like she was apologizing for taking up space in it. She was small, careful, chronically quiet, and she worked the evening shift at Aurélie, a 3-Michelin-star nestled between a private art gallery and a hedge fund office on East 67th Street, the kind of place where a bottle of wine cost more than her monthly subway pass, and the clientele treated silence from the staff as a basic human right. She hadn't always been this way. 2 years ago, Wren had been in her final year of a master's program in speech-language pathology at Columbia. Top of her class, the kind of student professors wrote letters about. She could listen to a person speak for 30 seconds and map the architecture of what was broken in their brain, whether it was a stutter rooted in childhood anxiety or the fractured syntax of a stroke survivor struggling to rebuild language from the wreckage. She had a gift for it, an almost musical ear for the patterns hidden inside damaged speech. Then her mother, Anya, was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 54. The insurance covered almost nothing. The specialists cost thousands per visit. The in-home care that Anya needed just to be safe, while Wren was in class, ran $1,200 a week. Wren held on for 4 months, juggling clinic rotations, research deadlines, and overnight caregiving shifts, sleeping in 90-minute intervals on her mother's couch. When Anya wandered out of the apartment at 3 in the morning, wearing nothing but a bathrobe, and was found 6 blocks away, standing in the middle of Amsterdam Avenue, Wren made the call. She withdrew from Columbia. She moved back into her mother's apartment in Astoria. She picked up a tray and a black apron and joined the Ghost Brigade at Aurélie. The restaurant's general manager, a meticulously groomed man named Roland Fessier, had made her role clear on her very first night. "You are a back waiter, Wren. You pour water. You clear bread plates. You replace dropped napkins. You do not initiate conversation. You do not make eye contact with the guests for longer than 2 seconds. You do not exist. If a guest remembers your face by the end of the evening, you have failed." Wren had nodded, relieved. Invisibility suited her just fine. The anxiety that had settled into her bones since leaving Columbia made even small talk feel like walking across a frozen lake. She was grateful for the silence, grateful for the rigid choreography of fine dining service, grateful for a job that paid just enough to keep Anya's home aide coming 3 days a week while Wren covered the other 4 herself. Tonight, the tension inside Aurélie was different, sharper. The kitchen was running double prep. The sommelier was personally decanting a $19,000 bottle of Romanée Conti. The private salon, a hushed, oak-paneled room behind a set of frosted glass doors, had been set for 3 with the restaurant's finest Cristofal silver and hand-pressed linen napkins monogrammed with a single letter, K. The reservation belonged to Julian Kensington. Even Wren, who made a point of knowing nothing about the restaurant's clientele, knew that name. Julian Kensington was a 38-year-old billionaire, the CEO of Kensington Capital Partners, a real estate and development empire that owned roughly 11% of the commercial property in Manhattan. His face was on the cover of Forbes twice a year. His name was whispered in the same reverent breath as old money, though his fortune was barely a generation old. It had been built by his mother, Harriet, a legendary developer who had transformed the Brooklyn waterfront in the 90s before stepping back after a devastating stroke 3 years ago. Roland materialized beside Wren at the service station, making her flinch. The Kensington party arrives in 5 minutes. You are on water and bread detail for the private salon. Keep the glasses full. Keep your mouth shut. If you so much as sneeze in that room, I will personally escort you out the service entrance, and you will not come back. Are we clear? Clear, Wren whispered. She smoothed her apron, picked up the heavy silver water pitcher, and took her position near the frosted glass doors. The Kensington party entered Aurelie at precisely 8 o'clock. Julian came first, tall and sharp-jawed, radiating the particular brand of controlled exhaustion that only comes from managing a billion-dollar portfolio while also managing a public image. He was on his phone, speaking in clipped, low tones about a zoning variance in Tribeca, barely glancing at the maître d', who greeted him with a deep bow. Behind him was his wife, Dominique Ashworth Kensington. She was stunning in the way that expensive things are stunning, every surface polished to a high shine. A cream Chanel suit, a single strand of South Sea pearls, and a smile that operated like a thermostat, warm when it needed to be, cold when it didn't. She placed a possessive hand on Julian's arm as they walked, scanning the room with the appraising eye of someone who was accustomed to being the most important woman in it. But it was the third person who stopped Wren mid-breath. Walking slowly behind them, guided by a uniformed aide who released her arm at the door, was an older woman. She was perhaps 70, with a cloud of white hair pinned loosely at her temples and intelligent dark eyes that moved quickly, restlessly, across every surface. She wore a navy cashmere cardigan over a silk blouse, simple and elegant, but her posture was slightly hunched, as though she were bracing herself against something invisible. She gripped a small leather handbag against her chest like a shield. This was Harriet Kensington. The moment Harriet sat down, the dynamic at the table became visible. Julian put his phone on the table, face down, and rubbed his temples. Dominique immediately leaned toward the head waiter, a polished man named Etienne, and began discussing the tasting menu with the confident authority of someone who dined here monthly. Harriet sat between them, perfectly still, watching. Then Harriet tried to speak. The water, the words came out fractured, tumbling over each other like stones down a hill. Harriet's hand reached toward her water glass, then pulled back, her brow furrowed in visible frustration. She tried again. The glass, no, Dominique didn't look at her. She continued her conversation with Etienne about the foie gras preparation, her voice smooth and uninterrupted. Julian glanced at his mother, a pained helplessness crossing his face, then looked away. She has good days and bad days, Dominique said lightly to Etienne, as if commenting on the weather. Tonight appears to be a difficult one. Don't mind her. Wren stood 3 feet away, holding her water pitcher, and her entire body went rigid. She knew that speech pattern, not from a textbook, not from a lecture hall, from hundreds of hours of clinical observation, from late nights transcribing patient sessions, from sitting across the table, from stroke survivors, and watching them fight to drag meaning out of the rubble of their own brains. Harriet Kensington did not sound like a woman with dementia. Her eyes were too focused, too sharp, tracking the conversation with perfect comprehension. Her frustration wasn't the bewildered fog of cognitive decline. It was the specific, agonizing frustration of a person who knew exactly what she wanted to say and could not make her mouth produce the words. Wren had studied this for 3 years. She had written her thesis proposal on it. Harriet Kensington had broker's aphasia. Her language production was shattered, but her understanding was completely, perfectly intact. She was a prisoner inside her own skull, fully aware of everything happening around her and utterly unable to articulate it. The recognition hit Wren with such force that she nearly dropped the pitcher. She had spent so many hours with patients like this, gently coaching them through word-finding exercises, teaching them to use communication boards and speech-generating devices, celebrating with them, when a complete sentence finally broke through the static. She knew with absolute certainty that with the right support and the right therapy, many people with Broca's aphasia could recover significant speech. Some recovered nearly all of it, but someone had to be working with Harriet. Someone had to be trying. As if answering her unspoken question, Wren watched Dominique reach over and gently pat Harriet's hand, the way one might pat a well-behaved dog. "Shh, Harriet, it's all right. You don't need to talk. I'll take care of everything." Harriet pulled her hand away. She looked at Dominique, and in that brief, unguarded moment, Wren saw something in the old woman's eyes that made her stomach drop. It wasn't confusion, it was hatred. Etienne was ready to take the order. Dominique ordered first, the Wagyu tartare for herself, the dry-aged strip steak for Julian. Then she turned to Etienne with an expression of exaggerated maternal concern. "For my mother-in-law, the seared halibut with the Meyer lemon beurre blanc. Her digestion is so delicate these days. Keep it very simple, please." Harriet's reaction was immediate and violent. She slapped the table with her open palm, hard enough to rattle the silverware. Her mouth worked furiously. "No, no, not that, no." The words were garbled, but the meaning was blazingly clear to anyone who cared to pay attention. "Harriet, please," Dominique said, her voice hardening beneath its silk. She turned to Etienne with a small, apologetic smile. "You see what I mean? The confusion, it breaks my heart. Just the halibut, Etienne, thank you." Etienne nodded and retreated. Julian stared at his plate, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He looked like a man who was watching something he didn't know how to fix, and had chosen to stop trying. Wren stood frozen at the sideboard. Her clinical brain was firing on every cylinder. She watched Harriet's hands, which were now gripping the edge of the table, and noticed something she had almost missed. Harriet's right hand was moving, not randomly. She was tapping, index finger, index, middle, pause, index, middle, index. Wren's breath caught. It wasn't a nervous tick. Harriet was tapping out letters. Slowly, painstakingly, using a simple pattern, 2 taps for one letter, 3 for the next, the kind of rudimentary communication strategy that a sharp mind trapped in a broken body would invent out of sheer desperation when every other avenue had been cut off. Wren watched the tapping, her pulse hammering. She mentally decoded it, character by character, the way she had been trained to decode augmentative communication systems. ALLERGIC, LEMON. The blood drained from Wren's face. She looked at the retreating back of Etienne, heading to the kitchen to place the order. Meyer lemon beurre blanc. She looked at Dominique, who was now casually smoothing her napkin, the picture of composed elegance. And she looked at Harriet, whose dark eyes were fixed on the tablecloth with the flat, defeated expression of someone who had tried to scream and been ignored so many times that she had stopped expecting anyone to hear her. Roland's voice sliced through her paralysis. He had appeared beside her like a spectre, his hand gripping her elbow. "Wren, why are you standing there like a mannequin? Fill the water glasses and get out now." Wren nodded mechanically. She approached the table on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She poured sparkling water into Dominique's glass. Dominique didn't acknowledge her. She moved to Julian, who was checking his phone under the table. He gave a distracted half-nod. Then she stepped beside Harriet. Up close, the exhaustion on the older woman's face was devastating. Harriet looked like someone who had been fighting a war for years, with no weapons and no allies. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, and a tension in her jaw that Wren recognized from her mother's worst days, the look of a person holding herself together through sheer stubborn will. Harriet glanced up at Wren with the automatic blankness of someone who had stopped expecting anything from the people around her. Wren set the pitcher down. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to pick it back up, to fill the glass, to retreat to the shadows, to keep her job, to keep paying her mother's aid, to keep the lights on in the apartment in Astoria. She was 3 months behind on Anya's neurologist bills. If she lost this position at O'Reilly, Roland would blacklist her at every fine dining establishment on the East Side, but she could not walk away from those tapping fingers. She could not watch another woman disappear inside her own silence. Wren pulled out the empty chair beside Harriet and sat down. The effect was instantaneous. Roland choked audibly from across the room. Dominique's head snapped around, her eyes widening in outrage. Even Julian looked up from his phone, his brow creased in genuine confusion. "Excuse me," Dominique said, her voice laced with ice. "What do you think you're doing?" Wren ignored her. She looked directly into Harriet's startled eyes and spoke softly and clearly, enunciating each word with the careful precision of a trained clinician. "Harriet, my name is Wren. I know you can understand me. I know your mind is sharp. You don't have dementia. You have broker's aphasia. Your brain knows what you want to say, but the pathway between the thought and your mouth is damaged. That doesn't mean you're confused. That means you need help finding the words, and no one has been helping you." For 3 full seconds, the private salon was completely silent. Then Harriet Kensington burst into tears, not the confused, unfocused tears of a deteriorating mind. These were the violent, shaking sobs of a woman who had been screaming into a void for 3 years and had finally, impossibly, been heard. She grabbed Wren's hand with both of hers and held on with a grip that was startlingly powerful for a 70-year-old woman. "Yes," Harriet choked out. The word was clear, ringing, unmistakable. "Yes, yes, that. Yes, get away from her." Dominique was on her feet, her composure cracking like thin ice. "Julian, this waitress is clearly unhinged. She is upsetting your mother. I want the manager immediately." "Roland." Roland was already rushing toward the table, his face the color of old parchment. "Mr. Kensington, I am profoundly sorry. This young woman is a junior staff member. She has no business being at your table. Wren, you are terminated effective immediately. Stand up and leave this room." He reached for Wren's arm, but Harriet slammed her palm on the table again. The crack echoed off the oak paneling. She pointed a trembling finger at Roland and shook her head with such ferocity that the pins in her hair came loose. Then she pointed at Wren and pressed her hand down on the chair, a gesture so commanding and clear that even Roland understood it. "Stay." Julian Kensington slowly put his phone in his jacket pocket. He looked at his mother, at the tears streaming down her face, at the desperate way she was clutching this stranger's hand, and something shifted behind his eyes. It was the look of a man who was beginning to suspect that the ground beneath him was not as solid as he had believed. "Let her stay," Julian said quietly. "Julian," Dominique's voice had gone sharp, almost shrill. "You cannot be serious. This girl is obviously trying to cause a scene. She probably recognized us and is looking for a payout. Your mother is confused. You know what Dr. Hartwell said. I said let her stay." Julian's voice dropped to a register that left no room for negotiation. He turned to Wren, his gaze intense, probing, the look of a man who had built an empire by reading people accurately, and was now terrified that he had misread the most important person in his life. "You said aphasia. Explain." Wren swallowed. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. "Your mother had a stroke 3 years ago. The stroke damaged a specific area of her brain called Broca's area. It controls speech production. When that area is damaged, people can understand everything. They can think clearly, they can follow conversations, they know exactly what they want to say. But when they try to speak, the words come out jumbled or incomplete. It's like knowing a phone number perfectly, but having a broken keypad. The information is all there. The output mechanism is damaged. She paused, steadying herself. This is not dementia. People with Broca's aphasia score normally on cognitive tests when those tests don't rely on spoken language. With intensive speech therapy, many patients recover significantly. Some recover almost fully. Has your mother been receiving speech therapy? Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. He turned to Dominique. She was. You told me the therapists weren't helping. You said you dismissed them because they were upsetting her. Dominique's left hand was trembling. She pressed it flat against her thigh. Because they were upsetting her, Julian. She would cry after every session. It was cruel to keep pushing her. Patients cry in speech therapy. Because it's frustrating, Wren said, unable to stop herself. It's one of the most emotionally difficult forms of rehabilitation. Crying doesn't mean it's not working. Stopping therapy is the worst thing you can do. It's like pulling a cast off a broken bone because the patient says it's uncomfortable. Harriet was nodding, fiercely, emphatically. She tapped Wren's hand and then raised her own hand, fingers tapping against her lips in the universal gesture for speech. Then she pointed at Dominique and made a slashing motion across her throat. Cut off. Stopped. She's saying you cut off her ability to communicate. Wren translated, reading Harriet's gestures with the fluency of someone who had spent years decoding nonverbal communication from patients who couldn't speak. Were there other tools? A tablet? A communication board? Anything that helped her type or point to words? Harriet nodded vigorously, then made a sweeping gesture, palms up and apart. Gone. She says they were taken away. That's absurd, Dominique said, but her voice had climbed half an octave, and a faint sheen of perspiration was visible at her hairline. She lost her tablet. We ordered a new one. It simply hasn't arrived yet. Julian, this is getting out of hand. This waitress is projecting some kind of fantasy onto your mother. She is not a doctor. I'm not a doctor, Wren agreed, keeping her voice even. I was 4 months from finishing a master's degree in speech-language pathology at Columbia before I had to leave. I've logged over 600 clinical hours with stroke and aphasia patients. I know the difference between cognitive decline and language impairment, and your mother does not have cognitive decline. Julian stared at Wren for a long, unreadable moment. Then he turned to Harriet. He leaned forward and took his mother's hands, the first time Wren had seen him touch her all evening. Mum, he said, his voice cracking on the word. Can you understand everything I'm saying right now? Harriet squeezed his hands. Her eyes were streaming, but her gaze was steady and clear and burning with 3 years of trapped intelligence. Yes, she said. The word came out clean and whole. Yes, Julian. A muscle in Julian's jaw flexed so hard, Wren could see it from across the table. He didn't let go of his mother's hands. Can you tell me? Can you try to tell me? Is Dominique hurting you? Harriet looked at Wren. Her mouth worked, her brow furrowing with effort. She, take, the paper, I. The syntax collapsed, the words piling up in the wrong order, fragments of meaning straining against the damaged circuitry. Take your time, Wren said gently, the clinician in her operating on instinct. 1 word at a time. Who? She. Harriet pointed at Dominique. What? Take! Harriet's hand made a grabbing motion. Take! Everything! The house! Take the house! Harriet shook her head. She held her hands apart, mimicking a large document. The paper. Sign. The paper. Documents, Wren said. She took documents? Harriet nodded furiously. Sign force. Sign the doctor. The doctor. He lie. The room was so quiet that Wren could hear the faint clink of crystal from the main dining room beyond the frosted doors. Dominique was standing perfectly still, her face locked in an expression of composed concern, but her right hand was slowly, imperceptibly inching toward the small beige clutch resting on the banquette beside her. "Harriet," Wren said carefully, "what did the doctor lie about?" Harriet's eyes locked onto Wren's with burning intensity. The next words came slowly, each one dragged from behind the damaged wall like a brick pulled free. "He, say, I crazy, not crazy. He, say, lock, me, up." She pointed at Dominique. "She, pay, him." Julian released his mother's hands. He stood up so slowly that the movement itself felt dangerous, the deliberate rise of a man whose entire understanding of his life was rearranging itself in real time. He turned to face his wife. "Is this true?" It wasn't a question. It was the flat, lethal statement of a man who already knew the answer and was offering one final chance for honesty. "Julian, darling, please." Dominique's laugh was bright and brittle, a champagne flute about to shatter. "She can barely string a sentence together, and you're taking this as testimony." "Dr. Hartwell is one of the most respected neurologists at Mount Sinai. He diagnosed her with advanced cognitive deterioration. The paperwork has been filed. This is all documented. I have been trying to protect you from having to deal with this while you manage the IPO." "What paperwork?" Julian asked. "The care transition plan, the recommended facility placement. It's all been handled with your family's legal counsel. I was going to walk you through it after dinner tonight, actually. I thought it would be easier to discuss without your mother present. But since we're apparently having this conversation now," Wren watched Harriet. The old woman's eyes had gone wide with something that wasn't fear, it was recognition. She tapped Wren's arm urgently and pointed at the beige clutch that Dominique's fingers were now resting on. "There," Harriet said, the word clear as a bell. "Bag. Paper." There, every head in the room turned toward the small beige clutch. Dominique's hand closed around it. "These are my private documents for a meeting tomorrow. They have nothing to do with." "Then you won't mind if I look?" Julian said, his voice carrying the terrifying calm of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and could smell a lie the way a bloodhound smells fear. He extended his hand. "Give me the bag, Dominique." "No." The single syllable hung in the air like a gunshot. "No," Julian repeated. "This is a violation of my privacy, Julian. I am your wife. You cannot simply—" Julian took one step forward and lifted the clutch from the banquette. Dominique grabbed his wrist, her manicured nails digging into his skin, her mask of elegance disintegrating completely. "Julian, stop. Stop it. You are making a fool of yourself in front of the staff." Julian opened the clutch. He reached inside and pulled out a folded set of documents. Legal-sized paper, heavy stock, covered in dense type. He unfolded them. Wren watched his face as he read. She watched the color leave his skin in stages, starting at his forehead and draining downward until even his lips were pale. His hands, which had been steady enough to sign contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, began to shake. "Petition for involuntary psychiatric commitment," Julian read, his voice barely above a whisper. "Patient, Harriet Kensington. Diagnosis, severe cognitive decline with psychotic features. Recommending physician, Dr. Alan Hartwell, Mount Sinai. Effective date," he paused, his jaw tightened, "tomorrow." He flipped to the next page, transfer of fiduciary authority over the Kensington Family Trust. Estimated value, $2.3 billion. Transferee, he looked up at Dominique. Transferee, Dominique Ashworth Kensington. As appointed guardian and sole healthcare proxy. The silence that followed was not silence. It was the vacuum left behind when the air has been sucked out of a room. Julian set the documents down on the table with the exaggerated care of someone handling something that might explode. He looked at Dominique. He looked at her the way a man looks at a painting he has admired for years, only to be told it is a forgery. 3 years, Julian said softly. I trusted you with the only person in this world who matters more to me than the company. I trusted you when you said the therapists were making it worse. I trusted you when you said Dr. Hartwell recommended reducing her communication aids because they were causing frustration and agitation. I trusted you when you said she was slipping away. His voice didn't rise. It dropped lower, which was infinitely worse. She wasn't slipping away. You were pushing her into the dark. You cut off her speech therapy. You took her tablet. You took her communication board. You isolated a brilliant woman inside her own broken language and then told me she was losing her mind so that you could have a doctor declare her incompetent and steal her trust. You were going to lock my mother in a psychiatric facility. My mother, who built everything we have. Julian. Dominique's chin was trembling. I was trying to protect us. The IPO is next month. If the board knew the state she was in, if investors saw her at the shareholders' meeting trying to babble like that, the stock price would get out. 2 words. Quiet. Final. Julian, please, we can discuss this like rational. I said get out. Julian's voice cracked open, the controlled calm rupturing into raw, devastating fury. Roland, who was pressed against the wall, flinched so hard he knocked a framed lithograph askew. Walk out of this restaurant. Do not go home. Do not contact my attorneys. Do not contact Dr. Hartwell, who I promise you will be losing his medical license by the end of the week. And if you come within 500 feet of my mother ever again, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you spend the next decade explaining yourself to a federal prosecutor. Dominique stood motionless for a single, suspended moment. Then, something in her face collapsed, the way a building collapses, the facade falling away to reveal the empty structure behind it. She turned without a word and walked out of the private salon, her heels clicking against the parquet floor in a rhythm that accelerated as she went. Click, 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 until the sound was swallowed by the murmur of the main dining room. Julian stood still for a long moment, staring at the doorway. Then his shoulders dropped. Not the controlled, measured descent of a CEO composing himself, but the full, helpless collapse of a son who had just realized how close he came to losing his mother while she was still alive. He turned and knelt beside Harriet's chair. He took her face in his hands, something Wren suspected he hadn't done in years, and pressed his forehead against hers. "Mum," he said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have known. I should have listened." Harriet placed her trembling hands over his. Her mouth worked, fighting the damaged neural pathways, and after a long, effortful moment, she produced a single perfect sentence. "You are here, now." Julian broke. He pulled his mother into his arms and held her, his broad shoulders shaking, and Harriet stroked his hair the way she must have done when he was small, when the world was uncomplicated, and she could still say everything she needed to say. Wren stepped back. She picked up her water pitcher from the table, suddenly acutely aware that she was witnessing something private and sacred and not meant for her. She turned toward the service station, intending to slip away through the kitchen. Her job was done. Probably her job was done in the permanent sense, too. She calculated the math in her head. She had enough savings for 2 weeks of Anya's home aid if she cut groceries to the bone. "Wait." Julian's voice, thick and unsteady, stopped her at the frosted glass doors. He stood up, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and walked toward her. He looked at her worn-out shoes, her oversized apron, the name tag that read Wren in small, unassuming letters. Roland surged forward, sensing an opportunity. "Mr. Kensington, please let me assure you that Aurélie deeply regrets this breach of protocol. This employee acted entirely on her own, and I want you to know that she has been terminated and will be escorted. Roland. Julian didn't look at him. If you fire her, I will purchase the lease on this building tomorrow and convert this space into a Chipotle. Do we understand each other? Roland opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded with the vigorous enthusiasm of a man who has just watched his career flash before his eyes. Perfectly, sir. Wren is an exemplary member of our team. Julian turned his attention back to Wren. You said you were 4 months from finishing at Columbia. Yes, sir. Why did you leave? Wren hesitated. She wasn't used to people asking her questions. My mother was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. I couldn't afford the care and the tuition at the same time. Something had to go. Julian closed his eyes briefly, and Wren saw the weight of that sentence land on him, the cruel symmetry of a woman who gave up her career to care for a mother losing her mind, and in doing so, rescued a different mother from being falsely imprisoned for losing hers. My mother needs a speech-language pathologist, Julian said. Not in 3 months, not after a referral process, not through some agency that Dominique vetted. She needs someone who can look at her and see what you saw tonight. Someone who understands that she is still in there and knows how to help her find her way out. He paused. She also needs someone who isn't afraid to sit down at a table where they don't belong and say something when everyone else in the room is too powerful or too complicit or too comfortable to notice that a woman is drowning. Wren's vision blurred. She blinked hard. She thought about her mother, sitting in the apartment in Astoria right now, watching television she no longer understood, slipping further away every day into a silence that no amount of speech therapy could reverse. And she thought about Harriet Kensington, who was not slipping away, who was right there, sharp and whole, and fighting, and who had been deliberately, systematically silenced by someone who was supposed to love her. I would need to finish my degree, Wren said. I'll fund it. Full tuition, full stipend, any clinical hours you need. You work with my mother as you complete your program, and we pay your mother's care. All of it. Wren stared at him. Mr. Kensington, that's non-negotiable, Julian said. Behind him, Harriet was watching them, and for the first time all evening she was smiling. Not the polite, diminished smile of a woman performing wellness for the benefit of others. A real smile. Radiant. The smile of a woman who had been underwater for 3 years and had finally broken the surface. Harriet tapped the table twice and pointed at Wren. Then she placed her hand over her heart and held it there. Julian glanced back at his mother. What is she saying? Wren smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in longer than she could remember, and it felt strange on her face, like putting on a coat she had forgotten she owned. She said thank you, and she wants to know if we can please get some bread, because she's starving and no one has brought the bread basket. Julian laughed. It was sudden and startling and real, a sound that didn't belong in this room full of shattered crystal and overturned lives, and yet it was exactly the right sound, the sound of something broken beginning to mend. That night, Wren Gallagher walked out of Aurélie for the last time. She didn't leave through the service entrance. She walked out the front door beside Harriet Kensington, who held her arm with a grip that said, I am not letting go of the first person who heard me in 3 years. Julian walked on Harriet's other side, his phone still in his pocket, his hand resting on his mother's shoulder. A black car idled at the curb. Wren paused on the sidewalk, looking back at the glowing windows of the restaurant where she had been invisible for the better part of a year. She thought about Anya, about the bills on the kitchen counter, about the Columbia acceptance letters she had kept folded in her nightstand drawer because she couldn't bear to throw it away but couldn't stand to look at it either. She thought about how the most dangerous silence isn't the kind that comes from a damaged brain. It's the kind that comes from a room full of people who can speak perfectly well and choose not to. Sometimes the voice that changes everything belongs to the person in the room who was told, explicitly, to say nothing at all.